And with this example, we'll understand the significance of this property, use submit behavior. Let's flip to Visual Studio. I have a simple ASP.NET Web application project here. Let's enter this literal text name. I want to bold that, so highlight and Control B. Let's drag and drop a text box control onto the web form, which allows the user to give the text. Discuss about the range validator control in ASP.NET. Before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch operator and value to compare. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. This is part 47 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll discuss about the regular expression validator control. Before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch parts 44, 45 and 46 of this video series. Regular expression validator is a very powerful validation control. This control is used to check if the value of an associated input control matches the pattern specified by a regular expression. Let's understand what we mean by this with an example. Now on the screen you can see that we are asking the user to enter a valid email address. Now we know that an email address has got a pattern. For example, it needs to have some characters or numbers followed by an @ symbol followed by some characters or numbers and then a dot and then the domain name. Okay, so this is the pattern of an internet email address. Now if user enters anything that does not adhere to this pattern, we know that it's an invalid email and it should be flagged as a validation error. So which validation control can be used to match to a specific pattern? Regular expression validator control. And the only property that is specific to this validation control is the validation expression property. Now in the validation expression you see a strange expression here. This is called a regular expression. Now this regular expression is specifying a pattern like this. Letters of words, one or more letters of words followed by an @ symbol followed by a few more letters of words and then followed by a dot and then few more letters. Now discussing the regular expressions themselves is beyond the scope of this video. We'll talk about regular expressions themselves in a later video session. In this session we'll see how to use the regular expression validator control. Okay, as I said, the only property that is specific to this control is the validation expression. Now let us see how to achieve this, that we can see on the slide. We'll ask the user to enter an email address. If it doesn't match the pattern, then we want to show a validation error message. Let's see how to use regular expression validator control. So let's quickly design this web form. Let's create an HTML table. So table, and it has got a tr, and this tr will have two tds. So one is that. So let's say we want to ask the user to enter their email address and I want that to wrap inside a bold tag. And obviously we need a text box for the user to enter the email. So let's drag and drop the text box and let's call this txt email. Okay, and then I need another row basically for the submit button. I'm going to use TD, but I want this TD to span across two TDs, so I'm going to set the call span attribute to 2. Okay, so let's drag and drop the button control onto the web form. and let's call this btn submit, and let's call this maybe save or submit. And then I need another tr basically to include a label for the status. So let's drag and drop a label control onto the web form, and let's call this lbl. We'll discuss about obtaining a strongly typed reference to the previous page when cross-page posting. Before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch parts 53, 54, and 55 of this video series. In part 55 of this video series, we have discussed the basics of cross-page postback. In that session, if you remember, we had two web forms in an ASP.NET Web Application project. On web form 1, we have got two text box controls where the user can enter their name and email. Once they click this button, cross-page postback to web form 2, the contents of this web form will be posted to web form 2. And on web form 2, we have got two label controls. And in the code behind, we are actually using this .page.previous page property to retrieve the previous page object, and then from the previous page object we are using the controls txt name and txt email present on this web form 1. From those text boxes we are retrieving the values and then displaying them in these label controls. So as you might expect, if I run this web application project as it stands, whatever values that we type into the text box controls on web form 1, and then once we submit those values, we will be able to retrieve and display them on web form 2. Currently we are on web form 1. I post this to web form 2. So on web form 2 we are able to retrieve them. And the way we are retrieving them is by using the find control method. Now there's nothing wrong with this, but it could be a little dangerous. Now for example, let's say I am when I'm developing this application, instead of typing in the ID of the control as txt name, let me say I had a typo. Instead of txt name, I had txt name 1. And now look at this. When I build the solution builds successfully without any compilation errors. On the status bar, you can see build succeeded. Now we deploy this application to production. Users start using them. And look at this. When I run this application, the web form 1 loads without any problem. Look at that. Currently we are on webform1.aspx. Now I can type. Look at this. The application is working fine. But then when I click this button and when the contents of this web form are posted to web form 2, on web form 2, what's going to happen? It's going to, it will successfully typecast the previous page to, page object, and then we are using the find control method. It tries to find a control on the previous page with txt name 1, but on web form 1, do we have any control with that ID? We don't. So obviously that's going to throw, this find control method is going to return null, and then on the null object we are retrieving the text property. So it's going to throw a null reference exception, and that happens at runtime. Okay, so our users will see the application breaking. So when I click this button, as you might expect, we get object reference not set to an instance of an object, which is nothing but a null reference exception. Okay, in this session we will see how to get a strongly typed reference to this previous page object so that we can use properties which can completely eliminate these null reference exceptions. Okay, let's see how to do that. Now, to obtain a strongly typed reference to the previous page, there are two very simple steps. The first step is to create public properties. So on web form 1, create public properties for those things that you want to expose to web form 2. In our case, we want to expose the name and email to the destination page. So I'm going to create public properties for these two strings, name and email. So let's first do that. So since name is a string, I'm going to create a string property, public string, and I'm going to call that name. And it's enough if we create them as a read-only property, because on the destination page we are just going to read those values. We are not going to alter them in any way. So I am going to have only the get accessor, and here we are going to return whatever value that is present in the txt name text box. Okay, so that's one property, and let's do the same thing for the email. Public string, and that's going to be email, and email will be present in txt email text box. Okay, so we have got the two properties that we require. The next step is to obtain a strongly typed reference by typecasting. So what do we mean by that? So on the destination page, look at this. How are we currently getting a reference to the previous page using this.page.previous page, or we can also say simply this.previous page. That will also give the same object back. Okay, now but then if you look at the IntelliSense, what it is returning a page object back. But we know for web form 2 the previous page is going to be web form 1, so I can typecast the page object to be web form 1, because that's what I'm expecting back, and then declare this object as web form 1. Okay, now we know that on web form 1 we have these two properties, and along the same lines we are going to retrieve the value from txt email text box and then assign that to label email. Done. So that's the only code that's required. So let's run this project now and then enter the name of the user and then the email, and once we click the go to go to web form 2 button, we should be able to retrieve form 1. I can expose the name and email that are typed into the text boxes using public properties. So let's create those public properties. So since name and email are strings, I'm going to say public string name, and I'm going to just have the get accessor because we only want to read the value. So return, where is the name present? It's present in txt name text box, so we are going to return that. And along the same lines, I'm going to make the email the public property. So public string email, and that's going to be in txt email text box. That's it. So what changes do we have to make to web form 2? Now on web form 2, we know that context.handler returns a page, but we know it's going to return web form 2. But the best way to check that, actually, let's do that. So context.handler is going to return, since we are coming from web form 1 to web form 2, it's going to return for us web form 1. Okay, now I can simply get rid of this code and then use on web form 1 we have properties. Sorry, that's the last page. We have properties name and email. So we can directly use landed on web form 2 using server.transfer or server.execute method from web form 1. If you land using any other technique, then context.handler would not work. The control values from the previous page can be accessed using find control method or using public properties. The problem with find control method is that if you misspell the control ID, we could get a runtime null reference exception. Using public properties instead of find control method can eliminate these runtime null reference exceptions, and we have seen that as well. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Welcome to Presume Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 59 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll discuss about query strings in ASP.NET. Before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch parts 56, 57, and 58 of this video series. In ASP.NET, there are different techniques to send data from one web form to another. We have discussed about cross-page postback and context.handler objects in the previous sessions of this video series. In this session, we'll discuss about query strings. The rest of the techniques, which include cookies, session state, and application state. Okay. Now, what are query strings? Query strings are actually name value pairs. Okay, that can be appended to the URL of the page that we want to navigate to. And to indicate the beginning of the query string, we use query string. So to the name of the web form that we want to navigate to, I am appending question mark. So question mark indicates the beginning of the query string, and then you can give your query string any meaningful name that you want. Since I am using a query string to move the name of the user, you can and symbol, so plus double quotes again ampersand. This indicates the beginning of another query string variable. Now what else I want to send from web form 1 to web form 2? Email as well. So I'm going to say user email is equal to, and that's again the name of the query string variable. And where is the value coming from? The value is coming from txt email text box. That's it. So all we have done until now, to the web form that we want to navigate to, we used a question mark to indicate the beginning of a query string. That's the name, the value. Now the next task is to actually read that value from the URL and display it on these label controls on webform2.aspx. And to read a query string variable, we can